Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to feed a couple of my systems. While I'm feeding one system that's got worms in it, and then while I'm feeding the other system too. But the other system is a cocoon nursery, and the whole idea of feeding in a nursery, at least in my mind, not so much about feeding the worms, but it's more about luring them to a particular place to facilitate their collection and haul out. So the systems are getting broccoli, carrots, jalapeno peppers, some cantaloupe melon rinds. They're the systems that you see over there in the corner. The tray on the bottom is the one with the worms, and the smaller tray resting on top of it is the one with the cocoons and hopefully baby worms. So we're going to get those up on the bench and see how they're coming along. I thought we'd begin here in the cocoon nursery. In here, after 80 days, I would like to think that we've given plenty of time for any cocoons that may have been in the material. Ample time to hatch. And then at that point, I'm assuming that the baby worm is so puny that it's not really, big enough to be considered as one that you can try rounding up or, hauling out. So I always imagine that even though there's only a certain period of time needed to let cocoons hatch, it still also seems like there's a follow-on period where you just need to give the little babies a chance to grow to at least some basic small size where you can count on the fact that they're probably moving throughout the system and searching for this and that. When they're really small, when they're just still newborns, I don't know, I just somehow feel like they're probably just going to stay put where they are, but I could be completely wrong about that. So I always kind of assume that there's a little extra time needed between hatching and catching. Never thought of it that way. So you saw that flimsy paper that was covering things here. That was put on here that way 12 days ago when we last checked in. And even prior to then, we had already been covering only with paper, but at that point we still had 2 sheets of paper. And that was still probably too thorough of a covering to allow for much drying to occur, and that was the reason we got rid of the more intact piece of paper that had been covering things here, and we left only that really tattered one in the hopes that it would allow for a good bit of moisture to exit the system through evaporation. It does feel like we're gradually getting to the point where the stuff will kind of crumble a little bit better than it would have in the past. I just kind of looked down and I spotted a fairly light colored cocoon here in this little pile of castings. Light color in cocoons means, pretty recently placed in here, versus a more dark color one would be one that's been around for a while. So, one like this is one that I don't really see myself, hanging out waiting for, but, one like this one here, once again, kind of stuck in the castings, not sure if it's visible, but this one's got a much darker appearance, and one of those I would assume is much closer to that point in time when the babies are going to emerge from it, and they'll get darker than that even. Oops. So I'd really like to see this stuff even get drier, because if I were to try to set up a place in this bin where I would want to try to lure the worms to with some fresh bedding, some fresh food, I'm skeptical as to how motivated they would be to go try to seek that out, because the material's very damp, and I also believe that by having been so damp for so long, there's all kinds of little stuff clumped together here, stuff that just never really had much of an opportunity to break down because it was nested within a pile of castings, overly damp castings. So this was just an example of me peeling away those castings and inside finding what appears to be maybe a little piece of cardboard, little piece of shredded bedding or something. So to me it seems like every clump has like a little surprise in it, some sort of a little food snack, some sort of a little bedding residue, all kinds of stuff that would equate to think about it, moisture, bedding, food, all the things the worms need or want, right there at their disposal everywhere in this material. So it just seems like there has to come some point in time where the material has dried enough that it will all crumble to the point where it'll all release anything that's caught up in it, so that it can all finally get foraged down and eaten. Otherwise, you got a bunch of material that, you know, would probably still need to be screened. All that stuff would have to come out. It wouldn't really classify as castings and wouldn't pass through a small sieve. I mean, you saw that piece of cardboard I revealed from that one chunk, and I think that's just probably true for most chunks. So as much as I know that the worms really enjoy the dampness in a good moist bin, it does feel like that moisture is just going to kind of work against you in numerous ways down the line. So I might have just reacted a little too late during the winter time when my heater was running constantly and drying the air out of the, drying the air out so much that I had to cover up with plastic in my systems to protect them from drying. I could have just easily left the system uncovered in the winter to the very dry air in the house, and the stuff would have dried out quite quickly. But now with the heater not running for about a month now, the humidity levels are rising. I see cocoons all over the place. So it's a little bit more difficult for stuff to dry off. I'm sure, blending it like this, getting the more dry stuff that had been out on the surface down low, mixing it in with the stuff that's been down low and moist, getting it all hopefully to equalize to some slightly drier level, and then continuing to leave it uncovered, maybe even, perhaps doing away with even that last tattered piece of paper to really give this stuff a chance to dry. I was so tempted, I thought I might even be using this piece of cardboard here for you-know-what, but I don't think we're going to go that route today. I think we're just going to settle on this little aeration of the material, inspection of the material, and I do feel like maybe leaving off the cover. Leaving off that paper cover might just be the next best thing for this thing. We've gradually gone from plastic cover to 2 paper covers to 1 paper cover, and at this point I can certainly see us just doing away with that paper cover to really allow some drying to start happening here. And hopefully we can start crumbling these little boulders up and releasing their little gems inside in each account, because I think we'll be left with a whole bunch of stuff that's gonna I don't know, amount to possibly like a bin that's got a whole bunch more stuff remaining in it that still has to go, still has to be worked down. Alright, like I said, we're gonna leave this I don't know, do we keep it, leave it off, put it on differently? It really doesn't feel like it's creating much of a cover, but it also seems like if we just exclude it, the system probably has a much better chance at drying. So let's leave it this way and hope for the best, hope for a point in time soon where we can really get all this stuff to crumble and flow and release its little trinkets inside. So we might be that much closer to starting a migration of the worms. All right, let's get the worm bin over here and feed them. I must admit I did bring enough food, I think, down here to not only feed this bin, but also to set up the migration. So I don't know if we're going to give them all of this stuff. It feels a bit much. So we'll think about it, because I would also like to include some of my worm chow too. So if I can limit the amount of kitchen scraps I give them and supplement it with a little bit more worm chow, then that's cool. Now I'm seeing some slightly different, out of the ordinary stuff here. I guess the first thing that caught my eye was the presence of a lot of little white worms that you might be able to see on the camera. I'm not sure. In certain places they might be more visible. Those are pot worms, I guess, coming up to the surface here to take advantage of the moisture that's been recirculating beneath that piece of plastic that we just removed. And then this this newspaper is sort of just a landing pad where all that moisture comes. And I'm also seeing, I don't know, seeing a lot of little tiny speckles here. And they're so small, I can't tell if they're just some sort of a, some sort of a calcification or some sort of mineral deposit, or are they moving? Are they mites? I can't tell. It's always interesting to see the other creatures that are kind of in your system with your worms. You think of it as a worm bin, but there's just so much else going on. springtails, mites, pill bugs, you name it. All kinds of little creatures helping out with the breakdown process. I guess we'll hang on to this coffee filter to indicate where we last fed, because I didn't bring coffee down today, even though last time that was pretty much all they got. I had a couple days worth of coffee to give them, and just to spice it up a little bit, I gave a little bit of bedding, a little bit of worm chow, but it was what I would typically classify as a somewhat boring looking meal because it didn't have a whole lot of color content. So today we're going to go the other route of giving them some nice colorful foods. And I guess we'll just do what we've been doing in here, is just kind of open up the middle to put it in there for them. Like I said, coffee, shredded paper with worm chow in it. I suppose if we pick through the middle area, we'll possibly see some of the paper that was put in with the worm chow on it, some of the bedding left behind. But the worm chow we're not going to see, the coffee we're probably not going to see. There's also some stuff in here that tracks back to feedings gone by in the past, some very old mango seeds. Although that's the seed right here, the husk. I like to kind of put the seed back in the husk, because it does seem to attract a good worm crowd. Although they're not necessarily after the seed. I think they like going inside that husk anyway. Here we've got some, this was not part of the last feeding because they didn't get cantaloupe the last feeding, but that was there as a leftover when we were in here last, I remember. So it must have gone back from 2 feedings ago. See, now this stuff feels nice and flaky and crumbly and loose everywhere. Nothing feels like it's clumping into a ball or anything. So I don't feel like we're, at risk of having it get the way the castings that we just checked in on are. It just seems like once they get kind of clumping and sticky and muddy, it's so difficult to bring the material back to the point where it'll readily crumble. So hopefully by leaving it uncovered the way we did, it'll help it get to that point. So here's, leftover skin of cantaloupe. It's paper thin. Probably doesn't have a whole lot of value. That mango seed too, it's the sort of thing that's going to go for months and months before it vanishes. I know I'm bumping into other things that are leftovers, but some of them just sort of break in my hands. This, I wonder if it might actually be some leftover coffee just from its appearance. But I wasn't expecting to see a whole lot of leftovers in here. Let's go ahead and open up a spot to give them their feeding. You can see there's a good amount of bedding in here. 80-day system, doing pretty nice. A lot of castings piling up, but as you would expect, there's still also a pretty high concentration of bedding everywhere. It's just typical in my systems nowadays with the way I've been attempting to be really super generous if possible on the bedding each time I feed. We're going to do it the same way today. Over here it seems like they might have been working on something scrumptious. There were just a little bit more of a, there was just a little bit more of a crowd of worms hanging out right there than you'd normally see. When you're checking in on your red wiggler worms, for example, or I think your Indian blue worms too, those types of worms do have this tendency to sort of mob together and hound onto a piece of yummy food. So you get these real awesome worm spottings and worm balls and stuff when you're feeding your red wigglers. But with these night crawlers are somehow, I don't know why, but they just don't seem to exhibit that type of behavior as much. So you'll see them all over the place enjoying their food, but somehow they don't seem to crowd in on stuff the way other worm types do. I just keep seeing stuff that look like things we can maybe break apart. I think these were also kind of old top covering pieces of newspaper that just got thrown in here almost whole. So these big chunks of newspaper went in here last time too, I think. So let's get to feeding these guys. We're almost done. We just got to drop in some of my prepared bedding here that I got. I'm going to go with a nice generous handful like we usually do. Coat the whole bottom here so it doesn't really matter so much that we're putting frozen stuff in here. I guess if we start busting this thing up and it looks like it's a pretty generous feeding, then maybe we don't even need to include carrots. Although, you know, we got 2 carrots there. We can always just leave the smaller one here if we think the broccoli won't last. And I think broccoli is just one of those foods that normally doesn't really last in a worm bin. I thought it was just one of those yummy sort of foods that actually gets eaten quite quick. So this looks like a pretty good feeding, but I think we could still go for a little bit more, don't you? We can give them maybe a couple of these jalapeno peppers, which is, I don't know why, for some reason I'm typically not into feeding peppers in my worm bins for some reasons. I don't know why. But I figured here, let's give it a go. And we also occasionally like to provide the worms with a little bit of grit to help them with the breakdown of the foods we give them. So that's what I'm applying here. In my case, the grit that I'm using is a pulverized eggshell. And before I drop in a little bit of that yummy worm chow I showed you earlier, I'm just going to provide a little bit more bedding because I can. But the stuff is a little dry, so you know what I'm going to do here? Something I probably should have done earlier. It's not only moisture that I'm adding here, I'm also adding a special type of bacteria. So like if you have a pond or if you have places on your property where you're expecting water to just stand and mosquitoes to, you know, lay their eggs and populate, then you put one of those, what they call mosquito dunks, those circular donut shaped things into your pond or whatever, and it prevents the mosquito larvae from, I don't know, turning into a fly. So I think they'll hatch, but they won't turn into a fly or something like that. So what I've done was I've prepared some of that solution. I got a bucket with one of those circular little cakes in there, dissolving the mosquito dunks BTI solution so I could put it into my squirt bottle. And I usually try to administer it in the beginning because it's usually where, you know, out on the top surface that you're going to expect passerby insects to camp out, not down deep within the, you know, depths of the material. So it is out on the surface where you're expecting to have the gnats and the fruit flies lay their eggs and whatever. So that is the place to apply this stuff. So it is in the beginning when you first open the bin. That's usually best to put that stuff down because that's where, you know, that's the opportunity that you have to hit your target before you blend it, you know, start blending everything down into the system. So since this time I forgot, I guess I'm just making up for it here on the end. And luckily it was this slightly dry bedding that reminded me that a little moisture wouldn't hurt. But I don't know, this BTI solution does seem to be working in most of my systems. Here and there I'm popping in on one of my systems where it does appear like the mosquitoes are still hanging out. Not mosquitoes, gnats are still hanging out. Gnats or fruit flies or whatever they are. But I'm glad to say that in most places I've seen a huge reduction or, you know, complete absence of them. And I hope that's what we're going to see in this system pretty soon. I think that's actually kind of what we're seeing. I didn't see too much of a flying insect problem down here in this bin when we first came in. Otherwise I would have probably noticed. But I think we're done. All I've got to do here is return these top coverings. This top covering was placed in here new last week. Although it was already used when it came in here. This is its second commission. It was moved over from the cocoon nursery. This was the one that had been doing a much better job covering things than the tattered one is, or was. So these two were working in combination, but now the cocoon nursery is coverless to let it start drying and hopefully become more crumbly. But down here we're sticking with the plastic covering, I think, because the moisture will only do this system good. We did put some paper in there that we did spray, but it also seemed like it was a little bit dry. Even though we're also putting in, you know, bits and pieces of food that might also kick out moisture, I think we're in pretty good balance here. So if I start to get that feeling like it's maybe a little bit too damp, then I will be getting rid of the plastic, or I might just get rid of it soon as a preventative measure anyway. But for now, I kind of like having it there. Next time I might change my mind. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in with the African night crawlers on day 80. This was feeding number 6 for this system. And in the cocoon nursery, we're not going to start migration, but maybe next time, if we think there's a chance for it to work well. But until things dry there, I don't think it's going to work too well, so I want to wait. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.